This is Pat's Probe on the Our Lads Football Network. And on this week's show, we are going to ask Evan Lazar how the New England Patriots can gain 179 yards of total offense. And the weather's nice. It's a nice day in Foxborough, Massachusetts, and win the football game. How's everything going, Evan?
Everything's going well. We're still
Still in it.
competitive. Still in it. Yeah, exactly. Still in it. So I can't complain. A lot of articles, a lot of sports radio talk, obviously in New England about the rebuild and moving on from Cam Newton and next year and the draft and free agency. And I'm just excited to still be talking about a team that at least has a chance to continue on making this a competitive December, and that's kind of where my focus is right now.
And it should be because there's so much, even just a week of chaos where the Raiders look like they're ready to potentially implode. You don't know
Yeah,
what's going to go with the Ravens from week to week, the way things are going. And those are a couple of the teams that you're chasing, including the Miami Dolphins, who the
yeah.
Patriots have already beaten and are on a schedule. We've talked about this. There are three teams that the Patriots are chasing that the Patriots have beaten. So, yeah, it's not over. You might as well just think of who knows, it's better. I understand the other side too of the fans who have won the 6 Super Bowls and they've seen enough of Super Bowls that, hey, I don't care about getting into the playoffs for a playoff loss
Yeah.
when it's going to screw up our draft position and make our rebuild a little bit tougher.
Yeah, I get that take as well. I can understand that being sort of in the middle and mediocrity is sort of the worst place to be in any sport, really, no matter what sport you are in. But I think the biggest thing with Patriots fans, and I say this with all the love in the world, and not just Patriots fans, but Patriots media also. And again, nothing but love. But at the same time, I think we're so spoiled by the 20 years with Brady that a 5-6 football team that's in the hunt for the postseason, but still on the outside looking in, is a terrible team to
Yeah.
everybody. It's an absolute disaster.
Yeah.
It's a horrible season, a horrible roster, a total rebuild from top to bottom. And yes, they have holes. Yes, they have question marks in terms of the future at the quarterback position. But I think that a lot of teams, the Jets, the Cleveland Browns over the years, the Detroit Lions, would take New England's bad season,
Yeah.
and would love it,
Yeah.
right? And would love to be a 500 football team right now. So it's definitely a little bit of spoiled milk, right? They got a lot of Patriots fans, a lot of Patriots observers that have watched winning for so long that at this point, anything but and anything below that standard is seen as a complete
Who
waste of
comes
time.
back next year from the opt-outs?
So Dante Hightower, Patrick Chung, Marcus Cannon, those are the three main guys that opted out for the Patriots. Brandon Bolden, if you want to throw him in there. It sounds to me like Cannon and Chung are strong candidates to retire and just not come
Okay.
back. There have been some murmurs, unconfirmed sort of Twitter, internet rumors about Dante Hightower being in that category as well. But I think that Hightower is going to come back. That's just
He's
my
not that
gut.
old,
That's
is
not
he?
an inside. Right. No, no, I think he's probably 30 at this
Yeah.
point, something
That's
like
good.
that.
Yeah.
But it's mostly just because yeah, he's exactly 30 right now. I think he's still got a year or two of good
Yeah,
football
sure.
left in him. The Patriots could certainly find a major role for him as well in the defense, certainly. So I would like to see him come back. I think he will come back in some capacity next year.
Okay, let's get into this game. No Isaiah Wynn. And you think he'll return before the end of the season?
That's the hope. It's tough. He's been 3 years in the league, three times on the injured reserve for Isaiah Wynn. Injuries and just staying on the field have been a massive issue for him for his entire career in New England. Every time he's out there, he looks like a starting NFL left tackle and looks like a really solid lineman, but he just continues to keep getting hurt. This one was a really unlucky injury. He just kind of got rolled up
Yep.
on at the end of a running play, and he sprained his MCL in the process and just kind of got his knee bent in a wrong direction. So just an unlucky type of play. I don't think that you can really peg this on anything that we could have foreseen with Isaiah Wynn in terms of his durability. He was very durable at Georgia, started a ton of games for Georgia in college, and then he comes here and he's got 3 years in a row. He ends up on injured reserve. So it's definitely a tough break.
All right, let's go through the game. And was it Onenwu's fault when Hicks hit Newton that caused the interception?
So James White took the fall for it after the game. He was the running back in blitz pickup. What ended up happening, and they said it was James White, but basically, the guy over the right tackle rushed on Onwenu. They blitzed the off-ball linebacker in the B gap, and either one of two things needs to happen, right? The
Yeah.
running back needs to step up inside and take the blitzer, or Onwenu bumps inside and James White takes the edge defender. And it looked like James White just didn't really see the blitz coming, so he just kind of went and chipped and released into his pass route instead of staying in blitz pickup. And this is a difficult thing about the Patriots' protection scheme, is that a lot of their running back reads, which is a big reason why young running backs don't play a whole lot for New England early on in their careers, it's a dual protection system, which means that you're often looking in two different places and you have a dual read on the play. And it's kind of up to the player post snap to figure out which guy they're going to take often, and kind of decipher the scheme as the bodies are flying and as the bullets are flying around them. And that can oftentimes lead to some mistakes. There's obviously advantages to it. That's why they do it. But it can definitely lead to some of those miscues, which is also why they usually have a guy like White or a guy like Burkhead, a veteran in the game in those situations.
Okay, now that leads to Arizona going up 7-0, and it was 10-0. And for a game that was kind of ugly, to say the least, there were a lot of big plays. And the first big play was when the Patriots were down 10-0, and James White scored on the option on a 4th-and-2 call from the 7.
Yeah, so I thought that a lot of this game for the Patriots was made a lot easier by actually finally getting back to a complementary football type of formula. I think too often this season, the stat that I put out there on Twitter yesterday was that the Patriots rank 30th in the NFL in average starting field position on offense. So basically, what they're asking Cam Newton in this offense to do is drive the ball 75 yards for a touchdown every single time they trot out there. Well, when you have an offense that's not explosive or overly explosive in the passing game and is prone to mistakes and negative plays, it's really difficult to string drives together of that distance, right? So I thought the nice thing about this game was that we finally saw the other two phases kind of flow into the offense and give the offense some favorable field position and set them up in positions to score. You got two big returns. Yep. You have the interception in the third quarter, obviously, as well. Those are 17 of the Patriots' 20 points coming off of those three big plays in the return game and the interception on defense. So that was a nice part of it. And when you see is that they can execute offensively in spurts. And when you put them in good positions to execute and they can stay on script and on time, then they are moving the ball between the 20s. It's just the situational stuff. James White basically filling in for Rex Burkhead on that speed option play. That's usually Rex's role down there by the goal line. And that was a nice little toss out there by Cam. He got the defensive end to commit to him, and then he just tossed it out to James
By the way,
White.
what is the average? Where do the Patriots rank at field position?
They rank 30th.
What's the average?
And the average starting field position is around the 30-yard line. The Patriots are at about the 25-yard line now. That doesn't sound like a lot, obviously. In a game, it adds up. It adds up
absolutely.
over time, and it was something that I kind of was surprised to see, was that the Patriots offense actually ranks second in yards per drive this season, second most, only behind Kansas City, which I don't think anybody would guess if I tried to ask that trivia question.
Well, it's got to be their running game, though. That's the reason, right?
So they're actually moving the ball pretty well offensively. The issue is that they're being asked to go on these long, methodical drives because they don't have the explosive plays in the passing game to get 50 yards in one chunk, and they have to keep going 7, 8, 9, 10 play drives. When you have an offense that shoots itself in the foot a lot, that's going to be problematic. And they've actually gotten to the other side of the 50 often, but they're just not finishing the drives because various things happen, and they're unable to kind of recover from those.
Okay, then the big stop when Arizona had a
Turning
15
point of
play
the game.
drive. Yep, the 4th and
Yeah.
goal at the 1 with 3 seconds left in the second quarter.
This was sort of, I think, a really good microcosm in a lot of ways of how well the Patriots' run defense played in this game. The Patriots' run defense has definitely had its issues this year. Last week against Houston, I'm not sure how much credit we really want to give them. The Texans didn't really try to run the football because they were throwing it all over the yard, and the Texans also aren't a good running team. But against Baltimore and also against Arizona, two kind of similar read option style schemes, the Patriots have done a really nice job of stopping the run. And in order to do that, they got a lot of production from Jawan Bentley, who was really eating because of the defensive lineman in front of him occupying blocks. Lawrence Guy, in that particular play on the goal line, it was Akeem Spence, who started and played in his first game with the Patriots on Sunday. A guy they signed off the street, and now he's playing a pretty big role for them. And he occupied a couple blocks and let Jawan Bentley kind of stay clean at the second level and fill the gap, and they were able to make the stop. And that was what we saw all day long with Lawrence Guy, with Butler, with Spence, with Dietrich Wise. Those guys just occupying combination blocks on inside zone and allowing Jawan Bentley and Terez Hall and the rest of the Patriots defense to then rally to the ball behind them. And that was a formula that worked for them throughout the game.
Okay, now comes the Olszewski punt return touchdown. Excuse me, wait, that's right, it wasn't a touchdown. They called illegal blindside block on Jennings.
Yeah.
And I get that the call was made properly, but the call, the whoever drew up this penalty, they need to this has to change, because you can't ask Jennings to become a roadblock, a human roadblock, because what you're saying is, Jennings, you have to stand still, but the dude that's flying at you 100 miles an hour can run right through you.
Right. It's a tough call, and I think the biggest thing for me though is you look at the call at the end of the game, which I'm sure we'll get to on Isaiah Simmons. Both those calls either need to be penalties or they're not penalties, right? So the rest were at least consistent with in terms of egregious contact.
True.
The biggest thing within Freddie Jennings' penalty was he was moving back towards his own goal line and then blocking with force. We're not just talking about he punched him with his hands or he got in the way. We're talking about him lowering his shoulder into the Cardinals player. I can't remember who it was off the top of my head, but lowering his shoulder with forcible contact heading back towards his own end zone. That's exactly how the rule is written in the rule book, right? That's exactly the wording of the rule, is that you cannot block back towards your own end zone with forcible contact. So we spoke to Patriots special teams coordinator Cam McCord this morning, and Mike Reese at ESPN asked him, what's the coaching point, right? What's the teaching point there?
Sure.
What are you supposed to do? And he basically said you have one of two options. One is to engage the oncoming tackler with your hands and just kind of usher him out of the way, sort of like an offensive lineman in pass protection, just kind of, pushing him out of the way, but not lowering your body into him. And the other alternative is basically to just pick them, like in basketball, right? Just stand there and
get run over.
And get run over.
Yeah.
Those are really the two only things that you can do in that situation if you're Anthony Jennings.
I'd like to see film on how it's done correctly. Like you said, the way that you use your hands.
I was trying to find it, and I forget exactly who the player was, but there was a play a few years ago for the Patriots where they had an interception return, and the player put his hands straight up in the air and kind of just like stood there and kind of got in the way, like a basketball player essentially setting a pick, and that was the correct way to make the block, and he didn't get flagged for it. So that's what you're supposed to do. The biggest thing for Jennings was the forcible contact. If he hadn't lowered his shoulder and hit him so hard like he did and sent the guy flying, then maybe it wouldn't have been a penalty.
All right, then it was the Butler show. as he deflected the pass that led to the Phillips interception, and that led to White's touchdown run to give New England the 17-10 lead, the first lead of the game. And I think it might have been the very next series. Butler had the sack on Murray on third down. He had a sack, 3 quarterback hits, 2 tackles for loss, and he also batted the pass down that led to the interception. Big game for Adam Butler.
Massive game for Adam Butler, and this is what the Patriots have been expecting from him all year long, but he's been battling a pretty severe shoulder injury for most of the season. So hopefully this is a sign that he is healthy. He's long, he's explosive, he's got a great first step. He understands his role within the scheme in terms of they like to run a lot of stunts up front, picks for their guys, and they let Winovich and other guys that are a little bit faster wrap around that penetration by Butler. And sometimes, like on his sack, Butler will just go right through the offensive line as the penetrator and get right in the backfield himself and make the play. He was all over the field, and that was sort of a theme, I think, for the Patriots in terms of their pass defense, was that they finally, because they were able to stop the rushing attack, the Arizona's rushing attack on first and second down, they got into some third and long situations where they could dial up the pressure. So that's something that I think we're seeing sort of the yin and the yang of this year for the Patriots, is that they have struggled so much on first and second down. They are dead last in success rate in first and second down in the NFL, that teams are consistently in third and shorts and third and mediums against them, and it becomes difficult to then run their zero pressure looks, to run different exotic pressures up front, to get creative with their pressure packages. Finally, they were able to shut down Kyler, and they were able to shut down the read option rushes and stuff like that. And they were able to get into that pressure package on third down that we saw a lot of last year, that created a ton of turnovers, a ton of sacks and negative plays. And then that plays into the whole field position thing that we started with. And that's kind of how you get that complementary football. So the big part of the Patriots game plan against the Cardinals rushing attack was to force the ball out of Kyler Murray's hands. They identified, and rightfully so, that Kyler Murray was the best ball carrier on the Cardinals offense. So they set the edge, they forced him to hand the ball off to the running backs on those read option plays, and then they just let their defensive linemen like Butler just eat those blockers up, make the tackles on the running backs, and just live with whatever Kenyon Drake or Chase Edmonds does against you, because they're probably not going to beat you the same way that Kyler Murray would with his legs.
Okay, let's go to a crazy series for Arizona, as they're able to tie the game, but they needed 2 big penalties on McCourty first and Gilmore, first on 4th and 5, then on 3rd and goal, and to keep the drive alive. So on the 3rd try, Arizona was able to punch it in on a Drake touchdown run with 8 minutes left. What did you think about the penalties? McCourty, I mean, what I can say about McCourty's is, to me, I think it's simple, and that is, that's not an all-pro. Okay,
Right.
so I don't care how you do it. Don't let Arnold beat you. I mean, don't get a penalty. Don't let him score a touchdown. But the dude's named after a bread. He doesn't score touchdowns. That's all actually he can probably do is throw a couple of touchdowns in a season, because he's not going to stretch it. He's just not a good player. So that's the only thing that I was negative about McCourty allowing himself to get a penalty in that circumstance. Gilmore was, what are you going to do? I mean, it happens. It's Hopkins. But what did you think about the whole series, the whole 3?
I think what was frustrating about the Gilmore penalties was that DeAndre Hopkins was giving it back to him just the
That's
same as he
true.
was giving
Yep.
it back to Hopkins. And it just felt like, okay, if there was an egregious penalty, a egregious pass interference call or something like that that really affected a play, then okay, then you obviously have to throw the flag. But what I saw for the most part between those two guys was just 2 all-pro players battling it out,
Sure.
right? And they're physical all-pro players too, right? Hopkins is a very physical receiver, and Gilmore is a very physical man press corner. So these are two guys that want to get into each other's faces and really kind of go in the ring with each other. And the refs at that point of the game really weren't having it. The defensive or the offsetting pass interferences calls. First of all, I don't know if I've ever seen that called in a game before, where they call offsetting penalties and they basically just throw out the play. And unfortunately for the Patriots, that actually heavily favored the Cardinals, that they threw out the play, because it gave them another shot at 3rd and 3, and they ended up converting on it the second time around. So that was a big swing in the game for Arizona, and it looked like Gilmore grabbed his arm, Hopkins grabbed Gilmore's arm, so they just kind of called the penalty on both guys, when probably that should have just been two guys battling it out in a no call,
Yeah.
right? And but ultimately, those three penalties were a big part of that drive. They gave up some plays here or there, other than those three penalties as well. But the offsetting pass interference one was really the one that irked me the most, because it was such a heavily that ruling heavily favored
Sure.
Arizona to give them another stab at 3rd down. Whereas if you just don't call any penalties there and you say, no call, just two guys being physical with
Yeah,
each
it
other,
is silly. Yeah, you're right.
then it's 4th down.
Yeah. What the Patriots did a good job of in the game was not giving up any big plays, including with Hopkins. I mean, this is a big play offense. They want to make big plays, whether it's Kyler Murray running around, guys getting open for big plays, whatever the case may be. It's a big play offense. Kirk's had a really nice season. They have Hopkins, but the Patriots didn't give up any big plays, really. And when Arizona did score, they scored on a lot of these, or didn't even score. There were long drives that they forced Arizona into long drives. So for the most part, the defense did a really good job. And, you got to tell me whether or not you think that the scheme devised by Bill and Steve Belichick was, because they definitely confused Murray. It was
Yeah.
a different defense than we saw with Houston, but Watson's a little bit more of a veteran quarterback already than Murray is, so maybe there's that. But also, was that a defense that you think that they just came up with, or do you think they saw something that other defenses has seen over the last few weeks, and it's all a part of, oh, we've got the blueprint now on Kyler Murray?
Well, I think that this blueprint actually goes back to Brian Flores and the Miami Dolphins about a month ago. And usually, when the Patriots play a game against a team that isn't a divisional opponent that I'm not super familiar with necessarily, I look at the schedule and I see, did they play the Dolphins? Because
Right.
Brian Flores runs the same defense down in Miami that the Patriots run up here. A lot of man coverage, a lot of zero pressure, a lot of those different types of things that you saw on Sunday out of the Patriots, the Dolphins did a month earlier against Kyler. Now, they didn't do it as successfully as New England did, but they were able to do a lot of the same things. Now, I do want to mention that Kyler did have a shoulder injury coming into the game, his right shoulder, his throwing shoulder, and it looked like he might have been a little bit limited in terms of pushing the ball down the field as a result. I'm not sure how much of a factor it was, but it's worth mentioning. So the Patriots, they mentioned something on Friday, Bill Belichick did, that originally I had my whole kind of spiel for this game written out already and what the Patriots were going to do against Kyler. And then Bill said something really interesting last week, and that was somebody asked him about the kind of the threat of all-out blitzes or cover zero blitzes against a mobile quarterback, because ideally you would like to blitz a guy like Kyler Murray a little bit and put him under some pressure, but then he's so good with his legs that he can just kind of scramble out of it, and then you're in trouble, right? Well, Belichick said, actually, when you rush four, you're actually covering six gaps on the line of scrimmage with only four guys. But when you rush six, you get a guy in every gap. So in theory, you should be able to contain the quarterback better with something like a zero blitz than something like a four-man rush. So I thought that that was really interesting, because the Patriots haven't always kind of agreed with that. Against Deshaun Watson, they rushed four basically the entire game. and he's a pretty mobile guy also, and they didn't really seem too worried about losing contain in that respect. So this game, they came after Kyler Murray. They covered up all those gaps. He had nowhere to run when he tried to scramble out of the blitz, and they really forced him to sit back there and beat them as a passer. Go through his reads, get through the coverage, find his hot routes against zero pressure, things like that. And it wasn't always all out pressure. What they did a lot of the time was they showed 6 or 7 guys coming at the quarterback, and then certain guys would drop off and certain guys would rush. And that definitely confused Kyler a little bit because he was standing back there expecting to throw hot against the blitz, right? And he would look at his hot read, and the Patriots would, instead of blitzing everybody at the quarterback, they would drop guys, 1 or 2 guys, off into little short zones underneath slants and crossers and middle of the field routes that are typically what you're accustomed to seeing in terms of a hot route against the blitz. So the Patriots really schemed it up really well. They were able to say, okay, we're going to give the threat that we're going to bring out this all-out pressure. That's going to get us one-on-ones and unblocked guys and at times as well. And then what we're going to do is we're going to actually drop off guys and then have them fall underneath those little short patterns that are his easy outlets. And they were able to kind of limit him that way. If you don't have a ton of time back there, then obviously scanning the field down the field to find deep passes is not going to happen. So it was definitely a great game plan by Bill Belichick, and you kind of wonder with the way that they constructed this defense, the Kyle Duggar pick, Adrian Phillips signing, these types of quarterbacks, Kyler, Lamar Jackson, those are the types of guys that they had in mind when they made a lot of these moves in the offseason. That was what they looked at their schedule and said, we're going to face Wilson and Mahomes and Jackson and Watson and Kyler, and they still have a couple more. Herbert's a pretty mobile guy, and if Tua plays in Miami, then he's a pretty mobile guy. And Josh Allen, obviously, in Buffalo twice a year. And they said that we better get some guys that are these hybrid safety types that can chase around these mobile quarterbacks and contain these mobile quarterbacks. And they've been able to successfully do it, at least against Lamar and Kyler. The difference with Deshaun is that he's just such a good passer from the pocket at this stage of his career that he's on a different level of those two guys as a thrower, as a passer, and a processor. So he just picked them apart. But in terms of what they were able to do against Lamar and Kyler, that's why they built this. That's how they built this defense in the offseason.
Yeah, because Deshaun, I think he gets mistaken sometimes because of his ability to run. But Deshaun doesn't want to run. He runs because he has to run. When the pocket breaks down, he can use his athleticism to run. Kyler, Lamar especially, they want to run. They want that as part of their game plan. And Lamar, because he's not a very good passer. Kyler's a good passer, but he's young. And I think he's going to continue to run a little bit, use that. Why not? He's young, he's fast. It's worked for him in college. It still worked for him in the NFL. But at some point, Kyler will use this as a lesson. He went up against, a brilliant tactician. And when Bill goes up against these young quarterbacks for the first time, I know there's stats out there about how successful he is in these situations. Kyler will learn from it.
Right. And that's a big part of it too. Watson last year in 2019, we actually talked about this in last week's pod, really tore up the Patriots blitz schemes, right? He really just shredded them against the blitz, just attacking single coverage down the field and really unfazed by the pressure. And when you're Kyler, even though he's faced some zero pressure before, I mentioned the Miami game, they brought a lot of blitzes at him and stuff like that. He looked confused and rattled at times. And there were situations where he might have been able to kind of extend or step up in the pocket and away from the rush, and he just didn't really have a great feel for the pocket, and he was just kind of retreating, and kind of just running backwards at times and backpedaling, trying to buy himself time to kind of heave it down the field, and it just didn't work out that way for him. So it was definitely a great game plan to limit Kyler's legs. Similarly with Lamar, they basically said the thing we need to take away with both of these guys is both the design runs and the scrambles, and just kind of force those two guys to beat us as throwers, and neither one of them were capable of doing it.
All right, and then the end of the game, it was really crazy how the game ended over the last few minutes, because first you had Newton's interception that led to the field goal attempt for Gonzalez, and initially you're thinking, oh, I mean, Newton's played so bad today. He just threw another interception. It's going to lead to a field goal. Then you're going to ask him to march down the field. You kind of felt they were going to lose this game at that point. But the first thing that I thought about when Gonzalez went out there was we've already seen Gonzalez miss one of these. So this is not going to be so easy. It's at that 47-yard kind of, you never know. And now you got a guy who's already missed one of these. And sure enough, he missed it. But then it's 3rd and 13. And even the play call was normally tell you, we're just going to punt. We're going to get 3 or 5 yards. If we're lucky, we're going to punt. But somehow Cam was able to take a 3rd and 13 and Arizona gave up the running play, which was, I mean, if you're Arizona, I mean, you are just killing yourself for allowing Cam to run for the first down. And then, as we mentioned before, the rookie Simmons adds to it with the 15-yard penalty, which was kind of, when you watched it initially, you were like, huh, are they going to call the flag? Like, as soon as it happened, it wasn't so egregious or so, because when those plays happen and there's going to be a flag, it. That wasn't the case. You were like, oh, are they going to call it? And then sure enough, they called it. And you looked on replay and you were like, again, it was one of those things where, yeah, maybe they did have to call it by the letter of the law, but it wasn't as bad as a lot of them that we've seen.
Right, so there definitely was some helmet-to-helmet contact, and I don't want to act like there wasn't, but there was a whole lot of shoulder-to-shoulder contact as well. It was probably like 90% shoulder-to-shoulder and 10% head-to-head, but unfortunately, those are the types of hits that they are trying to get out of the game, right? They just don't want the headshots in the game, and I think also on top of that, big guys fall hard, right? That's the old saying. And Cam Newton went flying. He really did go flying, and it looked like a giant, giant hit watching it in real time. So I think when you
on the Patriots sideline too.
Right, on the Patriots sideline, and David Andrews and the Patriots players, to their credit, they were ready to go. After that hit, they were amped up and angry in defense of their quarterback for that hit. And Isaiah Simmons is lucky that Andrews didn't try to sock him there at the end of the game. So I think that the biggest thing, going back to the play, the run itself was such a greatly timed design by Josh McDaniels. I've watched it a couple of times, and my first analysis of the play was that it was a read option play, right? He either had the option to hand the ball off or take it out the backside. When I watched it again, though, if you look at the blocking scheme, I actually think that it was a cam run the entire way. I don't think that there was any option, because the left tackle, instead of going in on like a zone blocking scheme, he actually stays over the defensive end and blocks the defensive end on the edge. Then what ended up happening was that the Patriots knew all game long that Budda Baker, the Cardinals safety, was going to blitz at some point, right? He's a blitzer. That's what he wants to do. He's a downhill filler against the run and a guy that is very aggressive as a blitzer against the pass. So they were waiting all game long for Budda Baker to come screaming off the edge like that, and they just timed it up perfectly. He comes screaming off the edge. He crashes down to the running back. Illuminor blocks the end on the left side, and there's just nobody there. It's kind of like a naked bootleg. And there was just sort of nobody there, and Cam ends up taking it for the first down. And it's funny because earlier on in the drive, he threw high to James White on the screen pass on the very first play of the drive. He took a sack on the second play of the drive. Like, the drive was not going well at that point by any means. And they were able to get that play called at the exact right time and kind of take Arizona by surprise, because they're blitzing Baker expecting a pass.
Which, by the way, I know they do it because it works, but when I can't stand when my defense on 3rd and more than 10 yards blitzes. Now, if it's Patrick Mahomes and you want to give him some pressure, Aaron Rodgers, one of the elite guys, and you just need to have pressure for whatever reason, okay. But this offense, the Patriot offense, is not complete many 3rd and 13s. There is no reason to blitz. Unless you want to make a play like a turnover, you don't trust your offense, you have to make something happen. Otherwise, that is a risky play by the defense, and I just hate when my defense makes that call, because when you get beat, it's terrible. It doesn't make sense to you, but you know why they do it. It was a big break for the Patriots.
Yeah, huge break for the Patriots, and I'm sure we'll get to this as well. But I can't say enough good things about Nick Folk.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
money folk. Yes.
unbelievable.
Yep.
This guy, they signed him in 2019. He had been playing in the AAF. He was out of the NFL since 2017 at that point. They signed him in 19 to replace, Stephen Gostkowski went on injured reserve that year. He was out for the year with an injury. They brought in Mike Nugent, who was an absolute disaster for a couple of weeks there, and replacing Gostkowski immediately. And they bring in Folk, you sign him off the street, and since then he has been a really consistently money kicker for them, and has kind of rejuvenated his entire career here in New England, and jump-started his entire career again. And now he's got two game winners of over 50 yards in the last month. And I think he'll probably win Special Teams Player of the Month for November for his efforts. So it's pretty incredible that a kicking situation that really could have been disastrous for the Patriots
Yep.
coming into the season. They draft Justin Rohrwasser in the 5th round. He's been on the practice squad all year. He's not going to play this year unless Folk gets injured, and looks like maybe a bad pick. They passed on guys like Taylor Bass, in Buffalo, and Rodrigo Blankenship in Indianapolis, and they draft this kid Rohrwasser from Marshall that nobody's ever heard of.
That was the thing.
And
It was like, who's this guy?
right. And he has not done, he was a disaster in camp, all over the place with the ball in training camp, loses the job to Folk, and Folk has just been solid money for them. He's missed 2 extra points. So one of them was in a rainy game,
Yeah.
but 19 for 21 on field goals, and 2 50-yard game winners, channeling sort of his inner Adam Vinatieri over the last couple of months, dare I say.
Well, when he was on the Jets, which he really had a good run there were moments like if the Jets would be in a losing skid, and Folk, let's say, would be part of the losing skid. You think nothing was going right, and he'd have like a bad game. He'd miss like a 40-yarder or something, and then the Jet fans, they want to toss everybody off the team, and then
Right.
they would talk about Folk, and I always would stick up for Folk because yes, he's gonna miss 3 or 4 kicks a year where you're not happy about, but he is money. When you need him to make a big kick, it's like 90% or higher. He's going to make the big kick.
Right, and especially for the Patriots right now, they need every win they can get. So to have him make those big kicks against the Jets, and obviously last week against the Cardinals, I mean those are big kind of momentum changers for their entire season. A lot of these games are going to come down to the wire for New England. They're not blowing out teams anymore in Foxborough.
No.
So a lot of these games are going to come down to game-winning field goal attempts and final drives, and we've seen them come out on the wrong end of a lot of those this year. And this game against the Cardinals, the week before against the Texans, I'm sitting there watching the game from home, and I'm like, we've seen this movie before. This is going to end with the Patriots with the football and coming up short in some capacity, some way, to lose the football game. Well, we thought the same thing, and I was thinking the same thing against Arizona. I've seen this movie before. This is going to be a Cam fumble or a Cam pick or a Cam sack or a four down, turnover on downs or something like that's going to happen for the Patriots here to lose them this game. And they were able to get the run by Cam, obviously,
Which actually turned out to be a 30-yard run.
Yeah, it did. And look, I feel for Arizona to lose a game on a penalty like that is kind of, not that they lost the game solely because of the penalty, but you get my drift.
Yeah.
That's a killer way to lose a football game late.
Yep.
But at the same time, if they're gonna, like I said earlier, if they're gonna call the play on Jennings a
right.
penalty, then you got to call the one on Simmons a penalty too.
And again, they also got the calls on the touchdown drive on those DB on McCourty and Gilmore's penalties.
Right,
So,
right. Yeah, there was definitely some flags that went against the Patriots in this game, and then it kind of flipped in a hurry on the Simmons call
Yeah,
late in the
it did.
to screwing Arizona. But up until that point, it was really the Patriots that had gotten the short end of the stick from the refs.
And so, as we talked about last week after the loss, if the Patriots were going to have a shot, a realistic shot to win 9 games, you hope that a couple of these teams also come back down to the pack and you can get in on tiebreakers. That the most logical way, you beat Arizona, you lose to the Rams, and then you run the table. So the first step is down. Now, after watching the Rams last week and Jared Goff again, I'm not so sure that the Patriots can't steal this one. So it's definitely there for the taking. Anything is possible. It's not one of those games where you go, yeah, it's just asking too much. Let's just worry about sweet. No, this is a game that Patriots, because if the Patriots can win this game, even though, of course, you don't want to lose the AFC games, the reason we said that was because to think that the Patriots will end their season on a 5 or 6 game winning streak, that's just unlikely. So if you're going to pick a loss, it's better they lose in the NFC. So I look at this game as one of those games, thankfully, as you're a Patriot fan, you beat Arizona, where it doesn't really have to be, we lose this game, it's over. It's just if you lose this game, you got to run the table. But if you win this game, it's still almost like you got to run the table.
Right, yeah. So I think there's a lot of reasons for me to be optimistic about this Chargers game. Mainly, I would say two things. One, Bill Belichick, we just mentioned, against younger quarterbacks,
Yep.
usually
Especially
has
Goff.
yeah, usually has his way against those types of guys. It'll be Herbert, then Goff. They play the Chargers and then the Rams.
Chargers and Rams, yeah.
Right, and both in LA, and they're staying out there for the week as well. So they usually get the better of young quarterbacks like Herbert with the different pressure schemes and coverage rotations and things like that that really can confuse younger guys. The second thing is that we spoke to Josh McDaniels, Patriots offensive coordinator, this morning, and I think that other than maybe his own offense or his own defense, Josh McDaniels knows the Chargers scheme and the Chargers defense better than any other defense he goes up against. I mean, he went on and on about the intricacies of the Charger defense, and you could just kind of tell the way he was talking that he has a great feel for what they do defensively. And they're not a very exotic defense. They're not a game plan defense. They do the same thing every single week.
All
But they're
right.
just really, really good at it, right? You know, they just kind of keep drilling it, and they're really consistent. They don't give up a lot of big plays, and the Patriots don't produce a lot of big plays. So that's really not the biggest kind of thing in the world. And they're also a very zone heavy team, which usually favors the Patriots because their receivers are not usually great against man coverage. So the Patriots have historically just absolutely feasted all over Gus Bradley's defense in LA and with the Chargers. And Josh McDaniels kind of knows what to do against their scheme. It's the same scheme they run in Seattle, which Cam tore up earlier in the year, and the Patriots have had their way with in the past as well. So that's sort of the things that give me kind of hope for this game for the Patriots is that, one, it's Belichick against a rookie quarterback and Justin Herbert, and two, I think that this is probably the scheme that their offensive staff is the most familiar with, but that isn't a divisional opponent.
Okay.
So that's really going to be interesting for me to watch. Is that, does Gus Bradley do anything differently against Josh
Probably
McDaniels
not.
time around, or does he just sit in cover three with their 4-3 over defense and just kind of do the same thing that they do every single time they play the Patriots, and the Patriots just light them up every single time? Because when you play the same defense and the Patriots can come in there with 10 cover 3 beaters, and they just keep on spinning that dial over and over again with all the different coverage beaters that they have up their sleeve against that specific style of defense, then eventually the dam is going to break.
All right. So again, Chargers this week, Rams after that, and then it's AFC the rest of the way, including matchups within what the 3 division opponents. Is that it?
Yep, it's
That's
at
it.
Miami.
5 more left, right?
Yep, at Miami, Monday Night Football at Gillette Stadium against Buffalo in Week 16, and then home against the Jets to end it up in Week 17.
Yeah, and I can only hope as a Jet fan that they're still winless, or that Jacksonville wins a game.
It's good. That's going to be a really interesting game because I think that it's going to be fascinating to see where each team is in the standings at that point.
Like if
because
the Patriots are not, like
the
if they can't
Patriots
make the playoffs and they're
are
out
they,
of it.
are they going to consider losing that game?
Oh, I'm sure they would. I
Lawrence.
would. I know Bill Belichick. I think you know him. If
Right.
they know Trevor Lawrence can get in that division, that's going to be interesting.
And on top of that, he hates the Jets.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
So to stick it to the Jets and to make sure that Trevor Lawrence is in the division, I never think Bill Belichick's going to throw a game. I think that's always ridiculous when people say we should tank and things like that.
But he'll play a lot of backups.
I do wonder if that's a game where he says, "Hey, if we lose this one, I'm not going to really cry about it."
No. That's when you know that you're going to wind up seeing your number 2, number 3 quarterback, a lot of young players and so forth. But,
right.
It could also be interesting if the Patriots need the win to get to the postseason. which as a Jet fan, if they're fighting for that number one spot, that's what I want. I want the Patriots to make sure that they are going out there to win the game, because if they are going out there to win the game, they will win the game. So,
Yeah.
but it's going to be a very painstaking next 5 weeks for Jet fans, because Jacksonville just will not win that extra game to give the Jets a little bit of life here. So, and it's a huge difference between Trevor Lawrence and whoever is the second pick. So,
right.
I'm not looking forward to having to sweat this one out, but we'll talk more about the Patriots on next week's show. And we still have 5 more of these to go. And of course, we'll see if there's playoff talk or more. You will be previewing the game with the Chargers on Thursday, correct?
Correct. That's correct.
And that is, again, what is the website?
It's clnsmedia.com, and the podcast on Thursday is the Patriots Beat podcast, which you can find iTunes, Spotify, all over the place.
Thanks, Evan. Talk to you next week.
Thanks, Greg.